Hello everyone, a very good morning and welcome to BYJU'S Exam Prep. Welcome to the daily Hindu News Analysis. Before we begin, don't forget that we have a mega scholarship campaign going on till the 30th of May and you are eligible to win up to 60% scholarship on our online and offline classroom programs. You're guaranteed an almost 50,000 rupees discount on our courses. So if you're interested, just head to the pinned comment in this video and you'll get the link where you can register yourself to win this scholarship. So let's get started with the analysis of today's The Hindu newspaper by looking at the topics we're going to cover today. I've chosen 3 important editorials and columns from page 6 and 8. And once we discuss these topics comprehensively, we shall take a look at the smaller articles in today's newspaper which are more relevant for your prelims exam. So in total, we have 8 topics to cover and I promise to discuss all these topics in complete detail. The whole idea is to ensure that you don't have to go back and read the newspaper again. So if you're benefiting from these initiatives, do support us by pressing the like button, share these videos with other aspirants and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. So let's begin with the first article for today and let's look at this column on page number 6 written by Mahesh Sachdev, a former Indian diplomat. This column specifically focuses on the landmark changes that are happening in the Arab world as far as the geopolitics of the Arab region is concerned. In the last few months, there have been some major shifts, geopolitical shifts that have happened in the Arab region, especially in the West Asia region. These changes have been mainly driven by Saudi Arabia, which happens to be one of the most dominant powers of the Arab region and the West Asia region. Since India has a lot of interest in West Asia and in the Arab world, these developments are very, very important for our exams as well. So let's understand this topic in complete detail. The reason why this topic comes up for discussion is because recently the 32nd Arab League Summit was held at Jeddah in Saudi Arabia. This summit was quite unique. There were many new developments and landmark changes that were seen in the Jeddah Declaration that was adopted at the end of the Arab League Summit. Now let's see what announcements were made, what initiatives were announced in the Jeddah Declaration. Let's also talk about the Arab League from a prelims point of view, and then we shall break down the significance of these developments. See, the Arab League is a regional organization that's also known as the League of Arab States, which brings the various governments of the Arab world together in the West Asia, North Africa and East Africa region. Just take a look at the map here. Please observe this map. All these countries that you see here across West Asia, North Africa and parts of East Africa. These countries are the members of the Arab League. It's a grouping of around 22 countries from this region and it's a very important intergovernmental organization that was established in the year 1945 after the signing of Alexandria Protocol in 1944. Alexandria is a city in Egypt. This is where all the Arab countries of North Africa and West Asia, they agreed to form this grouping by signing the Alexandria Protocol. Following this, they established the Arab League in 1945 with headquarters at Cairo in Egypt. So all these important facts are very relevant for your prelims. The Arab League Summit was very, very unique because it was attended by all the 22 Arab member states, and this is happening after almost 12 years. In the last few years, whenever Arab League Summit used to happen, not all the countries were participating. Especially one country, Syria, had been removed from the group back in 2011 after the Syrian civil war began. So-called pro-democracy protesters rebelled against the Bashar al-Assad government of Syria. The Syrian government had cracked down on the protesters, which led to the disqualification of Syria from the Arab League. This essentially reflected the geopolitical tensions in West Asia and also the rivalries in the region, because it is widely believed that the Syrian conflict and also the civil war in Yemen, the situation in Iraq, all these are outcomes of geopolitical rivalries in the region between the Shia powers and the Sunni powers. It's a reflection of the sectarian divide in Islam accompanied with the geopolitical divide in the region. While the Sunni world is often seen to be led by Saudi Arabia as the most powerful country in the region, the Shia world is led by Iran, which happens to be a close ally of Syria. So Saudi Arabia and Iran have intense geopolitical rivalry between them. At least until recently, these two were intense rivals of each other, engaging in covert wars against each other, trying to destabilize each other. So Saudi Arabia was alleged to have funded and sponsored the Syrian civil war in order to destabilize Syria and thus cut Iran's influence and the influence of the Shia powers in the region. It was also alleged that Iran was retaliating by sponsoring the civil war in Yemen in order to destabilize the Yemeni government, which was close to Saudi Arabia. It has been alleged that Iran was sponsoring the Houthi rebels in Yemen, using them as proxies to undercut Saudi influence and the influence of Sunni powers in the region. So such rivalry in the region has been quite common over the decades, and as a result, West Asia and the larger Arab world has seen a lot of destabilization over the years. The region has been hit by repeated wars and conflicts and civil wars, and many countries here, which are usually autocratic regimes, they are known to promote extremist, radical, fundamentalist ideas and even sponsor terrorist groups, militias and armed groups. That is one prime reason why West Asia and the Arab region has seen a lot of volatility and destabilization. Now all of this seems to be undergoing a radical change because something dramatic has happened in the last few weeks. In the last few months, dramatic changes have taken place and Syria has been readmitted into the Arab League, and this would not have happened without the support of Saudi Arabia. Is that clear? So this was one big development during the Arab League summit. And in the Jeddah Declaration, you will notice that all the Arab countries, they are adopting a very realistic, pragmatic approach to foreign policy. In international relations, then generally, it's considered that there are two schools of thought. One, you have the idealist school of thought, following the principles of idealism, which is based on ideology, ethics, values, principles, etc. And the other school of thought is realism, which prefers realistic geopolitics, more pragmatic policies. Generally, in the Arab region, the Shia Sunni powers were very idealistic and they were stuck to their hardcore ideologies, and thus they would try to counter each other and destabilize each other. Now, in the Jeddah Declaration that was adopted, you see a more pragmatic, realistic approach being adopted by all the Arab countries, which indicates the possible development of friendly relations between the various rivals of the region. It means they are being more focused on contemporary challenges. They are trying to focus on socio-economic challenges of the region rather than playing geopolitics and trying to target each other. This is something that's quite evident in the Jeddah Declaration, and there are clear signs regarding this. For example, there is no targeting of Iran in the Jeddah Declaration. Usually, Arab League, which is dominated by the Sunni powers, led by Saudi Arabia, they would bring out statements targeting Iran and blaming Iran for all the problems. This time, such statements have been avoided entirely. But the statement does continue its regular support for the pro-Palestinian movement. But however, it has not mentioned Israel by name. It does not allege any human rights violations against Israel openly. This again shows a kind of normalcy that is being introduced with regard to the Israel-Palestine conflict, which also plays a defining role in the Arab region. All the Arab countries, historically, they have boycotted Israel. In fact, most of the Arab countries, they never recognized Israel. They didn't have diplomatic relations with Israel, except for a few, except for Egypt, Jordan. These were the first two Arab countries to recognize Israel and set up ties with Israel back in 1970s and 1990s. Recently, the United Arab Emirates, then Bahrain, they signed the Abraham Accords, which was mediated by the United States under President Donald Trump in 2020, through which they have recognized Israel and set up ties with Israel. This was followed by other Arab countries such as Morocco and Sudan from Africa. So these are the only countries in the Arab region which have recognized Israel and have set up ties with Israel. Generally, in the Arab region, as I told you, there is strong support towards the Palestinian movement, including giving support to radical extremist organizations. There is generally an allegation brought up against Israel of violating human rights. But in this Arab League summit, these statements have been avoided. Even though the support for the Palestinian movement continues to support the right of the Palestinian people to have their own country, the reference to Israel has been skipped, and this in itself is a big development. These changes that are very evident in the Jeddah Declaration shows an attempt to normalize the ties in the region and to reduce tensions and hostilities in the region. All the Arab countries have also sworn to reduce external interference, to stop foreign interference in the Arab region, and they have rejected the support for armed groups, militias and terror outfits. This also indicates that they are rejecting the interference of outside powers such as US, China, Russia and the European powers. Essentially, it is a sign that the regional powers are taking the lead. In the past few decades, external powers and global powers like US, Russia, China, they've all meddled in the region and they have played their own geopolitics. They've backed each of these sides and further increased tensions along with backing several extremist terrorist organizations. Now the Arab world rejecting such external interference together collectively is a very big sign and a positive sign, and it shows that the region is transforming itself and these countries are looking to keep out the external powers while focusing on their internal development and internal stabilization. And this is definitely positive news for the region and the world as well. It is good news for India as well, because India has major interests across the Arab countries and we have often found it very challenging to strike a balance between these rivals. For example, when we were dealing with the Sunni powers like Saudi Arabia, we had to be conscious about what Iran would think as a Shia power. While supporting the Palestinian cause, India had to be worried about how it would affect our ties with Israel. Or if India wanted to build closer ties with Israel, we were concerned about how it would be rejected by the other Arab countries, how it could affect our ties with the Arab countries. So for 70 plus years, we have been striking this balance. And finally, this normalization which is being witnessed, if it is cemented, then that is great news for India because we have very, very important national interests across West Asia and the Arab region. Now, in this ongoing normalization in West Asia and the Arab region, the role of Saudi Arabia is absolutely critical. Many strategic experts, they argue that these changes which are taking place, they are a direct result of the leadership of Saudi Arabia. These changes are taking place under Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, who is popularly referred to as MBS. This 37-year-old monarch and the future king of Saudi Arabia, right, is said to be driving these changes in the foreign policy of Saudi Arabia, which is leading these changes across the region as well. So that is why we have to understand the role of Saudi Arabia in all these dramatic changes that have happened. And what can India do? How can India step up its ties with Saudi Arabia? How can we protect our interests in the region? So that is something we need to understand. The writer of the column points out that Saudi Arabia under MBS has become like the main arbiter of the Arab world. It has become like a mediator, like an arbiter to resolve tensions, to resolve conflicts in the region. And this hasn't happened overnight. It's been happening over a few years, especially with the help of China, which has apparently played a positive role here. It has managed to bring together the regional rivals, that is Iran and Saudi Arabia. In fact, we have covered this in our Hindu analysis as well just a few months back. Through China's mediation, the Shia-Sunni rivals were brought together to the negotiating table, and Iran and Saudi Arabia have normalized their relationship. they've agreed to set aside their rivalry and they've re-established diplomatic relations. For many years, they had suspended all diplomatic ties with each other and they were busy targeting each other and destabilizing each other. Now, as China has major economic interests in West Asia, especially because of its Belt and Road Initiative and also because of its oil requirement from the region, it has used its economic geopolitical influence to bring both the Shia-Sunni powers together, and it has struck a normalization deal between Iran and Saudi Arabia. So, Saudi Arabia held several summits with the Chinese leadership, and this has definitely played a role in the ongoing normalization efforts. Crown Prince MBS has met Xi Jinping at least 3 times in the recent past, which has definitely played a role in normalizing ties with Iran. This normalization will help in ending the hostility. It will help in ending the covert wars, the proxy wars, and it might also reduce support for terrorism and extremism in the region. So as soon as Iran-Saudi ties were normalized a few months back, immediate efforts have begun involving multiple countries to resolve the ongoing conflicts in Syria, in Iraq, Lebanon, and Yemen. All these Arab countries which have been destabilized by these covert proxy wars, they might finally witness normalcy because these powers which have been sponsoring these rebellions and extremist groups, they are looking to withdraw the support and intense negotiations are taking place to bring these conflicts to an end. If Saudi Arabia has sponsored the Syrian civil war, today it is looking to end the involvement to stabilize Syria. Similarly, Iran, if it had sponsored the Yemeni civil war, it's looking to withdraw the support, and with the help of other countries, they're looking to work out a mediated settlement to stabilize Yemen. So if such stabilization happens across the destabilized countries, it will bring stability to the whole region and it will have a huge impact on global geopolitics and the global economy. So there are a lot of hopes that the civil wars in Syria and Yemen are about to end, hopefully within this year. And it's very important to note here that Saudi Arabia has managed to stabilize its ties with traditional allies like US as well. The United States has always been a traditional ally of Saudi Arabia. Since 1970s at least, US and Saudi Arabia have strategic relations, very close security relations. It has even been said that Saudi Arabia even has secret ties with Israel, even though it does not recognize Israel and has public animosity with Israel. At least behind the scenes, it has been widely said that US and Saudi Arabia, since they are aligned together, Saudi Arabia has even struck a secret peace deal with Israel. So this traditional partnership has been maintained, has been stabilized, because US is also a major weapon supplier to Saudi Arabia. It plays a key role in the defense of Saudi Arabia. So Saudi Arabia has been striking this balance while working with US on one side for its defense security partnership, having a secret relationship with Israel to balance the Palestinian issue, while normalizing ties with Iran on the other hand. And parallelly, it has engaged with China, especially in the economic domain, and it has built a strategic partnership with China today. Plus, Saudi Arabia is also known to work with Russia, especially when it comes to regulating oil prices through groupings such as OPEC and OPEC Plus. As the two top oil producers, Saudi Arabia and Russia work together to control the oil prices and the oil production in the oil market, right? So they're often accused of manipulating OPEC and OPEC Plus to suit their economic interests. But the core point here is Saudi Arabia is in a position to balance out these ties with different powers, with US, with Israel, with China, with Russia, and with regional rival Iran. And this normalization that we are witnessing is definitely good news, as I was pointing out. So the reconciliation that has happened with Iran through Chinese mediation gets the maximum credit here. But this also highlights the declining influence of the US in the region. It clearly indicates that the US was sidelined in this process. Generally, it was US which was the traditional external power in the region. It even has major military bases in the region. In Bahrain, in Qatar, US has a very strong military presence and it's a huge diplomatic influence across these countries. But of late, we are witnessing a sudden rise of Chinese influence driven by its economic investments. And the fact that China played a role in mediating between Iran and Saudi Arabia itself indicates the rising power and influence of China and the declining influence of the US. Because the US was completely kept out of the process. Parallelly, Saudi Arabia has shown willingness to engage with terror groups, Palestinian terror groups as well, such as Hamas, which control the Gaza Strip in the Palestinian territories. The Gaza Strip that faces the Mediterranean Sea is controlled by this extremist group called Hamas, which is often known to be supported by several Arab countries, including Iran, Syria, and at one point, even Saudi Arabia was known to have ties with Hamas. But now, Saudi Arabia is re-engaging with Hamas to talk, to ensure that it keeps a check on the radicalization of Palestinians, and we might witness a scaling down of the Israel-Palestine conflict as well. Because Saudi Arabia had broken its contact with Hamas as Iran and Syria started supporting it, right? Saudi Arabia, which was a rival of Iran, had broken off any ties with Hamas and it had stopped getting involved with these Palestinian outfits. But now the re-engagement which has begun, right? This could bring some pressure from Saudi Arabia on Hamas and other Palestinian outfits, and thus it could help in de-radicalizing some of the Palestinian groups. The other important point here is Saudi Arabia is not in a hurry to sign the Abraham Accords like the other Arab countries. It has held off on signing the Abraham Accords to recognize Israel and set up ties with Israel. So officially, Saudi Arabia is yet to recognize Israel. It still doesn't have ties with Israel. But since at least 1970s, 1980s, it's a well-known secret that Saudi Arabia does have a tacit understanding with Israel because both are allies of the US. Generally, they have been on the same side where they have opposed Iran together and targeted Iran together. Generally, this was the geopolitical alignment in West Asia. US, Israel, Saudi Arabia were aligned on one side because of their common rivalry with Iran. Iran was their common target. This was the general traditional geopolitical alignment. Now this alignment is changing. Saudi Arabia and Iran have normalized their ties and it is maintaining its ties, traditional ties with US and Israel as well. And it's not in a rush to recognize Israel. So that is the balance that Saudi Arabia has been striking under Mohammed bin Salman. And in fact, it has become such a key power today in the region that the warring factions in the Sudan civil war, which broke out recently, these warring factions, they are actually negotiating at Jeddah with the help of Saudi Arabia. The Sudanese army and the paramilitary force called RSF, which have been involved in the civil war in Sudan, right? They have been invited to Jeddah to negotiate and mediate and work out a settlement. And Saudi Arabia is helping these warring factions of Sudan to end the conflict in Sudan. So these are just examples and illustrations to show the geopolitical role that Saudi Arabia is playing in West Asia and in the Arab region. This firmly establishes the dominant presence and influence of Saudi Arabia in the region. Is that clear? So today Saudi Arabia has emerged as a major geopolitical force and its strength comes from its economic strength. The geopolitical strength of Saudi Arabia comes from its economic strength. Just look at the facts that I have added over here. Saudi Arabia carries a lot of economic heft. It is this economic heft which adds the geopolitical muscle to Saudi Arabia. Its GDP has grown by a staggering 8.7% when the global economy has been struggling. Its economy is considered to be almost twice the size of UAE, which is the second largest economy in the region. Is that clear? It's $1 trillion economy today, with the economy that is of double the size that of UAE, and it is without doubt the world's largest oil exporter. Its oil income has increased by a good 51%, hitting a record $228 billion. And as the top oil exporting country, it plays a critical role in controlling OPEC and OPEC+. OPEC and OPEC+, they are oil cartels. They are a grouping of oil exporting countries that functions like a cartel, which controls production and thus the prices. By manipulating production, the OPEC and OPEC Plus, they manage the demand-supply situation to keep the prices up and ensure that their profits are protected, right? So OPEC mainly includes the major oil exporting countries from West Asia, Africa, and South America. OPEC Plus brings together other countries, including Russia. Russia is also part of OPEC Plus. So Saudi Arabia, as the leader of these groups, works closely with Russia to determine oil production levels, to control the oil markets, fix oil prices, and thus it remains very, very significant geopolitically and as far as the global economy is concerned. The Saudi oil company, Aramco, which is one of the world's largest companies. It's not only the world's largest oil company, it's also one of the world's largest companies. This is a state-run company. It's owned by the Saudi kingdom, by the royal family of Saudi Arabia. So through this decisive control in the oil market, Saudi Arabia has largely managed to overcome the economic turmoil that has been going on. Despite all the crisis in the global economy, Saudi Arabia stands very strong, and it is seen as the key to reconstruct and rebuild the regional economy and the global economy. So this is what makes the country very, very significant as far as geopolitics is concerned and also as far as geoeconomics is concerned. So this is where you should understand why these developments are relevant for India. How is this relevant for the exam? It is relevant for the exam because India has major stakes in West Asia region. We are very close to most of the Arab countries, even in North Africa as well. For example, Egypt is a close friend of India. We have good ties with the West Asian powers as well, right? We have major economic interests, strategic interests all across the Arab region, especially in the West Asia region, which is the extended neighborhood of India. We have very important economic and cultural and strategic interests. And Saudi Arabia, as the leading power of the region, would obviously play a critical role in influencing Indian interests. India does have cordial relations with Saudi Arabia. It's a very close partner to India. Recently, we have built a strategic partnership, but according to the writer, this relationship is still below its actual potential. The writer feels that we can do much more to step up this relationship and thus extend our influence and protect our interests. So the writer says, as India is a major stakeholder in West Asian geopolitics, we need to pay attention to what is happening in the region. That is why these recent changes are relevant. Even though it is not directly linked to India, the changes which are happening in West Asia and in the Arab world, it has to be studied carefully. It has to be understood by the Indian government, by Indian foreign policy practitioners. We need to acknowledge the changes that are happening. We should closely watch the developments, and accordingly we should strategize. We should align our strategy to ensure that our core national interests are protected at any cost. As you know, West Asia is critical for oil supplies to India, and hence the whole region is vital for our energy security and for the very survival of the Indian economy, as majority of our oil and gas imports comes from West Asia region. We have a very strong Indian community in the region. The Indian diaspora is very strong. Just in West Asia, we have around 10 to 12 million Indians. If you take the whole Arab world, the number is much higher. If you consider North Africa as well, right? The Indian community here is very, very strong and plays a critical role as they are projecting our soft power influence and cultural influence, and they are sending remittances back home to India. And sometimes they often get caught in very difficult situations, like what happened in Sudan just a few weeks back. Right? The Indians here, they might get caught in conflict zones, or they might become victims of terrorism. They might be caught in a civil war situation or in between the conflict of two countries. So it becomes necessary to ensure their safety and well-being, right? Because they're contributing to Indian diplomacy, to the Indian economy. So the Indian government will need to protect its core interests in order to be able to help the Indian community, ensure their safety and well-being. Because Indian workers face many challenges here. They're often abused and exploited by their employers. They face many problems related to their wages, visa-related problems. They lack social security, right? So addressing all these labor-related issues is also a major concern for India. So if we have to protect these core interests, we need the help of Saudi Arabia. Since the region is closely involved with radicalism, terrorism, etc., these countries are crucial for India to counter terrorism. It's very important to have close intelligence cooperation with them and to maintain strategic defense ties in order to stabilize the region. Also, the region is surrounded by important choke points like the Hormuz Strait, Bab el-Mandeb Strait, which are vital shipping lanes for India as well. So the Indian Navy is constantly deployed in the region to protect the shipping lanes, to counter piracy, to counter terrorism. So if we have to deal with all these security threats, we definitely need to maintain close defense relations as well, along with intelligence cooperation. So these are the core interests we have across the region, and we cannot fulfill them, we cannot protect these interests without the help of Saudi Arabia, which is the leading power of the region. But thankfully, India has really stepped up its ties with this country over the last few years, especially after Prime Minister Manmohan Singh paid a historic visit to Saudi Arabia in 2010. The Riyadh Declaration was signed between the two countries, which established a strategic partnership between the two sides. Until then, it was a very transactional relationship where India was simply procuring oil from Saudi Arabia. India was just seen as an oil buyer. But post 2010, the relations have really transformed and a strategic partnership has developed. Today, Saudi Arabia is looking at India as a very attractive investment destination. It's playing a critical role in funding infrastructure projects in India. It is interested to invest in the petrochemical sector and sponsor key infrastructure projects. It has played a key role in filling up the strategic petroleum reserves of India that will help India build a buffer stock with regard to petroleum reserves, that is crude oil reserves. It has consistently been a top supplier of crude oil, fulfilling almost 18% of our energy requirements. Is that clear? Most of the years, Saudi Arabia has been the second biggest oil supplier to India. In the last year, Saudi Arabia has been replaced by Russia only because of the war, the Ukraine war, and because of the Western sanctions against Russia, because Russia has been forced to sell oil at a discounted price, which India has been buying in large quantities. So that makes Russia the second biggest supplier in the last 1.5 years. But generally, it is Saudi Arabia which is the second top oil supplier to India. It is also a very important trading partner, one of the largest trading partners of India, and a key export destination. Plus the Hajj pilgrimage to sacred Islamic pilgrimage sites like Mecca, Medina. It forms a close cultural bond between the two countries, representing the Islamic heritage between the two nations. And we have a very strong Indian community here, almost 4 million plus Indians. They reside and work in Saudi Arabia alone. So protecting their interests, ensuring their well-being is of great concern for India, and all these initiatives that India, Saudi Arabia have launched, right? We have seen a big transformation taking place after the Riyadh Declaration of 2010. But the biggest shift in the relationship is in the strategic and security domain. Because see, generally, prior to 2010, especially before the 26/11 Mumbai attacks, Saudi Arabia was always seen as an ally of Pakistan, always blindly supporting Pakistan. Saudi Arabia has always maintained very close strategic economic ties and defense relations with Pakistan. Saudi Arabia has given enormous funds to the Pakistani establishment, including to the deep state of Pakistan, that is the Pakistani army. It has been said that Saudi Arabia has often funded Pakistan's military modernization, strengthened its economy, and maintained very close strategic partnership. So before, let's say prior to 2010, whenever Pakistan would target India at platforms like Organization of Islamic Cooperation or at the United Nations, at these global platforms, Pakistan would often bring up controversial issues like the Kashmir dispute to accuse India of committing human rights violations. It would bring up India's internal issues to blame India and target India. So every time Saudi Arabia was seen to be backing Pakistan, they would vote in favor of Pakistan, and they were seen to be voting against India prior to 2010. But after the signing of Riyadh Declaration, after India and Saudi Arabia became strategic partners, we are witnessing a shift, a strategic shift in Saudi policy towards India. Saudi Arabia has not cut off its ties with Pakistan. Of course, their close relations will continue. But the most important point is Saudi Arabia today has gotten closer to India as well. Today it has been assisting India in sharing intelligence, in targeting Pakistan-based terror groups which often find support in West Asia. Several Pakistan-backed terror groups like Indian Mujahideen, Lashkar-e-Toiba, they've had a base in West Asian countries. And previously, these countries weren't helping India. But now, in the last 15 years, this relationship has really transformed and they're helping India in counterterrorism. They're sharing intelligence, they've stepped up defense cooperation, and we even have military exercises with many of these countries, including Saudi Arabia. It's because of the support Saudi Arabia and UAE gave to India that India could demolish terror groups like Indian Mujahideen. And on platforms like OIC and UN, Saudi Arabia has made a shift and it has been abstaining from these votes that Pakistan pushes against India, which shows the neutral position that Saudi Arabia has started taking with regard to the Kashmir dispute. And that itself is a big transformation. Even with regard to terror funding and tackling organized crime, Saudi Arabia has become a partner for India to tackle these threats that emanate from the West Asia region. So this is the big shift that we are witnessing, and it's only natural for India to watch these developments which are happening and further exploit the relations with Saudi Arabia to build our influence and protect our interests. The writer says, even though it's a good, close relationship, there are many areas where we can do better. Writer says that this relationship is not up to its best potential. So the writer is suggesting a free trade agreement with Saudi Arabia to step up our economic relations. He's suggesting closer strategic and defense relations, and as well as greater collaboration with Saudi Arabia in the field of innovation and development and infrastructure creation. So by taking these steps, India could get even closer to the regional power, and thus we can vigorously protect our important national interests in the Arab region. So this is what you need to understand from this big topic. It's a very, very important development which has happened, and you can definitely expect a question here, especially in your mains. With this, let's move on to the other articles which are relatively smaller. Let's look at this article from page number 8. This column here is related to the topic of artificial intelligence and the need for regulating AI, and how emerging forms of AI such as generative AI has been raising copyright related concerns. The emergence of generative artificial intelligence, it has taken the world by shock and surprise. I'm sure all of you would be familiar with generative AI platforms such as ChatGPT from open source AI, which is owned by Microsoft, then Google's Bard, right, and many other generative AI platforms. These platforms have gained a lot of popularity and traction in the last few months. Especially ChatGPT was seen as a revolutionary technology that could act as a generative tool. Meaning these algorithms, these self-learning, machine learning algorithms, they are trained on large data sets. They're trained with large data sets. They are built on the large language model. And these algorithms are able to generate content, create art. For example, they can create visuals, create a video, which is entirely fake, entirely artificial, generated synthetically by the algorithm. They can generate images, visuals, designs. They can even create a painting, for example. These generative AI tools can even produce songs and music, write poems. They can even write completely unique text and even code. They can even develop a software or write a code for a web page, and they can even write scientific papers or theses, or even write fictional stories, for example. Right? So that is the power of generative AI today. So this has raised enormous ethical and legal concerns about generative AI and the need for regulating it. But one of the concerns related to generative AI is the copyright related concerns. Since generative AI is creating creative content like painting, art, then video, audio, music and songs and poems, It raises concerns about copyrights that are held by artists. Now, what if a generative AI tool produces a painting which is not entirely unique? It learns from other existing paintings of other artists on which those artists have their copyrights, and their economic interests are protected through those copyrights. But AI tools might learn from those existing paintings which are copyrighted, and they might produce new artwork which may not be entirely new as such. Now, what will happen to the copyrights of the original artists who had actually made these paintings? Now, an AI tool is producing artwork by learning from that. It's just producing a small variation of that, and someone else is claiming copyright over it. Even AI artwork can be copyrighted. There have been recent incidents where AI generated artwork has been copyrighted by individuals, right? So this raises regulatory concerns, legal concerns as far as copyright laws are concerned. So recently there was a landmark case in the United States, and it's in this context that the column has been written. In this recent case, the US Supreme Court passed a final ruling that has brought up this debate between copyright infringement by AI tools and the need to regulate and manage AI technologies. The judgment is said to have implications on how we are going to regulate AI in the future, especially generative AI, and ensure how we'll protect creators and creativity through the right enforcement of copyright laws. It's important to find that balance, because AI generated artwork in some cases can be considered as a fair deal or a fair usage, even if it has learned from existing artwork. If there is a significant variation in the new artwork produced, then AI created artwork also deserves to get copyright protection. But at the same time, it should not affect the genuine copyrights of artists, which will compromise creativity and their economic interests. So it's important to strike that fine balance. So if you look at the existing copyright laws, the copyright laws, they protect the work of diverse artists, be it painters, sculptors, musicians, right? Or writers. All their copyrights are protected, and they will enjoy exclusive rights over their artwork, over their creative output. Now, these exclusive copyrights that are held by different artists, this has to be somehow balanced with the generative AI created content, and it should be covered under the exceptions that are provided under copyright laws. Under copyright laws, there are certain exceptions given in different countries and different jurisdictions. Under these exceptions, copyright provisions will not apply. All right, this is considered as fair usage. In certain cases, fair usage is allowed, even in case of copyrighted content. Now, for example, you can take a original song from an artist which is copyrighted, and you can make a cover song out of it without making a revenue for yourself. You can just make a cover song out of it and upload it on social media, right? That is generally not seen as a violation of copyrights in itself. So fair usage has to be considered, or else there is no point in creating art. If art is restricted only to artists, and if someone else is not allowed to, bring out different variants of it, right? Then it compromises innovation and creativity. So fair usage also has to be allowed. So exceptions have to be provided in a copyright law, but at the same time, it should protect the genuine exclusive rights of the artists. So any good copyright law should strike that fine balance. That is the challenge. Now, if you look at the exceptions given under copyright laws in different countries, it varies from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. Depending on which country you're talking about, the copyright laws and the exceptions given, they vary. For example, the exceptions in India are entirely different from the exceptions given to copyrights in the United States. In the US, the copyright law there follows an open-ended approach where the exemptions are not specified beforehand. The law itself has not specified the exemptions beforehand. If a case comes up, if a litigation comes up alleging copyright violation, then the courts will take a look on a case-to-case basis to check for fair usage. If they are convinced that it is fair usage. They will not place any liabilities on the accused. All right. They will not make them pay any royalty or penalties to the original artists. But if they can't prove fair usage, then they are penalized. Those who have broken the copyright laws, they will be made to pay a penalty. So in the US, there is an open-ended approach. It's a case-to-case approach where the courts will look into the claims of fair usage. Whether the usage of an artwork is fair, whether the new variants which have been produced, is it fair? Is it in line with the spirit of the copyright law? This is checked by the courts because they have an open-ended approach. But that is not the case with India. India follows a hybrid model. In our Copyright Act of 1957, we have Section 52, Clause 1, Subclause A, that provides for specific exemptions. Specific exemptions have been mentioned explicitly in the law itself, where copyrights will not apply. Is that clear? Let's say you're using a painting for a genuine purpose, you're making a variation out of it without seeking any revenue from it. So such exceptions are particularly allowed under the Copyright Act. So usage of artwork which is copyrighted is allowed under certain exemptions which are clearly specified under the law. But in some other cases, fair usage of copyrighted artwork has to be determined in courts and in appellate tribunals. Is that clear? We have an intellectual property appellate tribunal, right? So at these tribunals and at the courts, the matter will have to be decided whether the breach of copyrights is fair or not. Now, this being the legal landscape, since the laws are different from jurisdiction to jurisdiction, and since countries like India allow fair usage to an extent where exemptions are specified, here the real concern comes up as to how will generative AI impact copyright laws in the country. Now tomorrow, if someone uses ChatGPT to make a painting, a AI generated painting, and claims copyright over that, and if it is simply an artwork generated from existing paintings, the question is, who will have copyrights over that? Will the new creator using AI tool, should they be given copyrights? Or should the original artist, should their copyrights be protected? Right? That is the legal dilemma that comes up. And hence the recent ruling in the US, in this landmark case, it has some implications for India as well. If not a direct impact, at least there will be a persuasive effect on the Indian judiciary as well. There will not be a direct implication, of course. The US court has passed a ruling which has upheld the rights of the original artist. Initially, a lower court had ruled in favor of the new creator who had produced a small variation of the previous artwork. In this particular case, I'm referring to the Andy Warhol Foundation versus Goldsmith case. Goldsmith was a photographer who had taken a picture, a portrait picture of a leading musician and artist, Prince. And this photograph was slightly modified by Andy Warhol Foundation. So Goldsmith had claimed copyright over this photograph and had challenged the other artwork and had filed for compensation. So the lower courts, they ruled in favor of the foundation, saying that the variant that was produced was entirely different and they had treated this as fair usage. But Goldsmith appealed the case at the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court of the US has overturned the ruling. It has ruled in favor of the original artist, the original photographer who had taken this image. It has ordered the Andy Warhol Foundation to pay damages as well to the original copyright holder. So this ruling, if not having direct implications on India's copyright laws, it will at least have a persuasive effect on the Indian judiciary. And in the future, when we think of regulating AI, right, when we think of coming out with a law to regulate generative AI especially, the question of copyright will come up. So definitely there will be some lessons that will be drawn into the Indian model as well. All right. So that is a debate that you should be aware of. Since generative AI is a trending technology and an emerging technology, it does influence and impact our lives in many different ways. So you should know its impact on copyright laws, and it could be very important for your mains exam. Next, a very small discussion on India-Australia relations from this article on page number 6. We'll take a look at this editorial because Prime Minister Modi has yesterday concluded his visit to Australia. Here I'll not be going in detail again because just yesterday we have covered this topic in complete detail. We had a comprehensive discussion on India-Australia relations. I'll just take you through some of the announcements, the initiatives that have been taken up during the recent visit of the Prime Minister. Following this visit, this important visit, India, Australia have announced that they are going to open new consulates in each of the countries. Australia is going to open a consulate in Bengaluru, which was much in demand. Similarly, India will be opening a consulate in Brisbane, which was a long-standing demand of the Indian community in Australia. This will further scale up our diplomatic relations and consular relations. It will make it easier for students, professional workers and tourists as well to easily get visas from consulates. They've also signed an agreement on migration and mobility, which will particularly benefit students and professional workers from India who travel to Australia in large numbers. It will help both countries to keep track of the genuine visa holders who are traveling to Australia to study and work, and it will also help Australia to curb illegal migration, because a lot of Indians, especially from Punjab, they are often known to try and enter Australia illegally as illegal migrants. So Australia has some concerns regarding illegal migration, and such migration mobility agreements, they help in tackling illegal migration as well. Next, we have finalized the terms of reference for India-Australia Green Hydrogen Task Force. Both the countries are making a big switch towards clean renewable energy, and both are paying a lot of attention to green hydrogen. And they have set up a green hydrogen task force, and the basic terms of reference has been finalized for the task force. They will collaborate in this sector of green hydrogen, which will help transition their economies to cleaner technologies. They've also taken stock of their close defense security ties, with special concern about the rising Khalistan sentiments in Australia. Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi publicly expressed concern about the rising pro-Khalistan activities, the recent attacks against Indian temples and Indian groups in Australia. So Australian government has expressed complete support to India, and the security agencies of both countries and the intelligence agencies, they have firmly made it clear that we are going to collaborate, we are going to share information, work together, conduct joint operations if needed to curb the threat of rising Khalistan movement, right? And also to deal with any other security threat in the Indo-Pacific. They have also renewed their cooperation on renewable energy and critical minerals. Yesterday I told you, if you remember, India-Australia have a critical minerals partnership, right? So they have renewed that cooperation, and they want to focus on clean renewable energy as well. And they are planning a full-fledged free trade agreement. By the end of this year, they want to negotiate a full-fledged FTA, a comprehensive economic cooperation agreement, which will replace the limited trade agreement that we discussed yesterday, that is ECTA. Yesterday we spoke about a limited FTA that India-Australia signed last year in 2022, which is called Economic Comprehensive Trade Agreement, right? So this is a limited trade agreement. We want to replace this with a full-fledged FTA called Comprehensive Economic Cooperation Agreement. So both countries have agreed to speed up the negotiations, and hopefully by the end of this year, we should have a full-fledged FTA with Australia. So these are the key developments that you should note down as far as India-Australia relations are concerned. Now this brings us to the last part of today's discussion. We shall take a look at the prelims related articles, starting from this important article on page number 1 and as well as on page number 11. Please make a correction here. This is from page number 1 and 11, and the topic is related to art and culture. This is a typo here, a typographical error. So make a correction. The article is found on page 1 and 11 of the Hindu, and it's from art and culture. See, this Sunday, the 28th of May, is a very significant day. It's not just the day of your UPSC prelims, but it's also the day on which the new parliament will be inaugurated by Prime Minister Modi. So the upcoming inauguration of the parliament by the Prime Minister has already generated a lot of controversy, because the president, who's the head of the executive, the head of the state, has not been invited. And the Prime Minister is taking the lead role to go ahead and inaugurate the parliament. This has raised a lot of criticism, as it's against the spirit of the constitution, and several opposition parties have boycotted the inauguration of the parliament building. But aside that political controversy, the most important development related to that is an announcement that was made by Union Home Minister Amit Shah. The Home Ministry has announced that in the new parliament building, there is a important artifact which is being brought into limelight. This artifact is extremely critical as far as India's history is concerned, and this is something that we had forgotten. It was dissolved in the annals of history. It had not been adequately recorded. It hadn't been institutionalized in our institutional memory. So this historical memory and artifact is being revived, and to symbolize the transition which is happening to the new parliament, the government has said that it is installing a scepter that you can see here in the image, the Sengol scepter from Tamil Nadu. The Sengol scepter from Tamil Nadu is being installed in the new parliament building because it has a lot of symbolic cultural value. Is that clear? Let me explain this. First of all, you should know what is a scepter. A scepter is basically a staff, like a long stick-like structure, which has a crown on top of it. It is often held by royals, emperors, rulers, etc. That is often known as a scepter. The Sengol scepter in particular is this gold-plated silver and gold staff. It's around 5 feet in length. And on top of it, there is a crown where you can find the Nandi idol, the bull deity, which is sacred in Hinduism. Right? So this is the Sengol scepter, which has its origins in Tamil Nadu and traces its history to the Chola kingdom. The Chola kingdom, one of the dominant Tamil dynasties of the age-old days. The Cholas had this practice. When there was a transition of power, under the Cholas, when there was a transition of power from one king to another, the transition of power was symbolized by handing over this scepter to the next successor. All right. So that is what the scepter symbolizes, the Sengol scepter. You can see this beautiful image here of the Nandi with intricate carvings. All right. So during the Chola Empire, during the Chola days, the transition of power was symbolized by handing over the scepter from the current monarch to the successor. Now, a replica of this, a modern replica of this was made in 1947. And a priest from Tamil Nadu, from a very popular mutt in Tamil Nadu, handed over this scepter to then Prime Minister of India, the first Indian Prime Minister, Jawaharlal Nehru, to symbolize the handing over of power from the British to India. When India gained independence, when India became independent, this priest, whom you can see in this image, it's a dated image that Hindu had published back in 1947 on the 15th of August. So his name is Tiruvaduturai Adinam, from a very popular mutt in Tamil Nadu. This Tamil Nadu priest revived the Chola tradition of handing over the scepter as a symbolic representation of transition of power, and through this he had urged Prime Minister Nehru to symbolize the transition of power from the British to an independent India. So right before Prime Minister Nehru hoisted the flag at the Red Fort and delivered his historic speech, that is the Tryst with Destiny speech, right before that, this scepter was handed over by the British to Prime Minister Nehru as a symbolic gesture symbolizing the transfer of power from British India to independent India. But unfortunately, as a result of the horrors of partition and all the chaos following independence, this part of history, this significant part of history had been forgotten. It had not been institutionalized. But one teacher and scholar from Tamil Nadu who managed to stumble upon this evidence, he had recently written to the Prime Minister's office. He's a dancer as well, Padma Subramaniam, a very popular dancer and exponent of Bharatnatyam. He had written to the PMO highlighting the significance of the scepter. Following this, the government managed to hunt down the scepter, and now it will be installed in the new parliament, symbolizing the new transitions that India is making. Is that clear? So from an art and culture point of view, you should know what is the Sengol scepter. You should know its links with the Chola dynasty, the symbolic value of it, and why was it given by a Tamil Nadu priest to Prime Minister Nehru, and what exactly was it symbolizing. So that is something you need to understand. Next, moving on, a very small article on page number 10 related to polity. The Supreme Court of India has clearly pointed out that independence of judiciary is an integral component of the basic structure doctrine. The independence of the Indian judiciary has been reiterated to be a part of the basic structure doctrine. So the Supreme Court ironed out the basic structure doctrine in the landmark Keshwananda Bharti case back in 1973. We have recently marked the 50th anniversary of this landmark judgment in the Keshwananda Bharti case, right? So in this case, the Supreme Court laid down the basic structure doctrine of the Indian Constitution that essentially meant that the core structures, the core philosophy of the Constitution, which was envisioned by our Constitution makers, cannot be changed under any circumstance. For example, the nature of fundamental rights, the independence of the judiciary, right? The nature of federalism in India. Some of these aspects, the parliamentary form of democracy in India, these aspects are considered core and integral to the Constitution and cannot be touched through amendments. So it's well-known fact that independent judiciary is part of the basic structure of the Constitution. So what is special here about this article is that the Supreme Court has said even district level judiciary should maintain its independence from the other organs of the state, from the executive and the legislature, and even this is seen as part of the basic structure doctrine. Generally, when we say independence of judiciary being part of basic structure, it was always assumed that the independence of higher courts was being referred. Independence of the High Court and the Supreme Court. But in this recent case, the Supreme Court has said that even at the district level, the district courts, the district judiciary, even they have to be independent. They should function in an independent, autonomous manner without any influence, without any fear of the executive. Even this is being interpreted as a part of the basic structure doctrine. All right? So please make a note of the point. Next, page number 12, a very important article from Science and Technology. India is all set to triple the speed of its fastest supercomputers. Supercomputers, they are an array of mainframes that are arranged in this structure over here, which you can see in the image. They essentially combine tremendous computing power that can help in carrying out complex transactions and operations very quickly. The computing speed of supercomputers is measured in terms of FLOP, F-L-O-P. It stands for floating point operations per second. Is that clear? So speed of a supercomputer is determined in terms of FLOP or FLOPs, floating point operations per second. So India is looking to set up supercomputers with a computing power of 18 petaflops. 18 petaflops. This announcement has been made by the Ministry of Earth Sciences, because generally such supercomputers are used for weather prediction and weather forecasting, to accurately predict weather and even to detect extreme weather events like cyclones, right? You need advanced computing abilities to churn the data which has been generated and to carry out the complex statistical analysis and to finally come out with an accurate prediction. You need the help of supercomputers in weather forecasting. So India's Ministry of Earth Sciences, which looks after meteorological sciences and weather forecasting services, etc., has been operating few supercomputers already. For example, we have Pratyush, India's fastest civilian supercomputer, which is present at the Indian Institute of Tropical Meteorology in Pune. That's where Pratyush has been installed, at the Indian Institute of Tropical Meteorology under the Ministry of Earth Sciences. This is considered to be one of India's fastest civilian supercomputer, and it has a operational speed of 6.8 petaflops, along with another supercomputer called Mihir, which is at the National Center for Medium Range Weather Forecasting in Noida. All right. So in the civilian domain, we have two major supercomputers in the country as far as weather forecasting is concerned. Both are under the Ministry of Earth Sciences. One is Pratyush, the fastest, and second one is Mihir. Combined together, they have a processing capacity of 6.8 petaflops. Now we are planning to triple this to 18 petaflops with new supercomputers that India is procuring from France. Back in 2018, the Modi government signed an important deal with the government of France to procure advanced supercomputers for India at a cost of 4,500 crore rupees. This will scale up our supercomputing abilities in the country. In the military domain, it is expected that there will be classified supercomputers with greater computing powers, but in the civilian domain, what is known publicly, this happens to be the fastest. The Pratyush and the Mihir are the fastest supercomputers with a combined capacity of 6.8 petaflops. So the new supercomputers which are proposed that we are procuring from France will scale up the abilities to 18 petaflops. Finally, the last important fact, the world's fastest supercomputer is the Frontier Cray system at the Oak Ridge National Laboratory in the United States, which has a speed of 1 exaflop, that is 1000 petaflops. You can imagine the scale of the computing speed of the Frontier Cray system of the United States. It's present at the Oak Ridge National Laboratory and its operational capacity is 1 exaflop, that is 1000 petaflops. So please make a note of this. Next, another important article from page number 12 related to the global body that deals with human rights. The Global Alliance of National Human Rights Institutions. This particular institution, which is recognized by the United Nations, it's a UN recognized body. This Global Alliance of National Human Rights Institutions has deferred the recognition, the accreditation given to India's NHRC. See, in India, to protect human rights, we have the National Human Rights Commission that has been established under the Protection of Human Rights Act that was passed in 1993. Such human rights commissions are expected to be independent, autonomous, and they're expected to be in line with the Paris Principles of 1993. They're expected to follow any National Human Rights Commission of any country. They're expected to be truly independent and autonomous, free from political and government influence, and they have to follow the Paris Principles of 1993. Only then they will be accredited by the Global Alliance of National Human Rights Institutions. Is that clear? This is in line with the Paris Principles and as well as the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. So India's NHRC has often been accredited with A status or A rank. It has got the top rank for many years. But recently concerns have come up. There has been a challenge by experts and by global bodies that in India, NHRC is not exactly independent. It's not entirely autonomous. It's not free from political influence and government's influence. So on these grounds, it has been alleged that NHRC is not in compliance with Paris Principles and hence the Global Alliance of National Human Rights Institutions has deferred the accreditation for the NHRC. This is happening for the second consecutive year. So in this context, you should know about this Global Alliance, few basic facts for your prelims. So please make a note. It's a global network of national human rights institutions implementing the Paris Principles of 1993 that provides for mandate and competence of the national human rights institutions of the world. They should be autonomous from any government and political influence, maintain their independence as provided through the law, the constitution. They should promote the spirit of pluralism. They should have adequate resources to check human rights violations in their country and adequate powers to investigate and even punish the perpetrators of human rights violations. Right? These are the basic principles to be followed by any national human rights institution. So if they are in compliance with the Paris Principles, they are accredited with status A or rank A by the Global Alliance, which is a non-profit entity set up under the Swiss law. India's NHRC has often won the A rank. For many, many years, it has won the A rank. But last few years, concerns have been expressed at the global level that NHRC of India is not truly independent, not truly autonomous. Because the appointments are political. It relies on the government for support and funding, even for investigation. And it is not seen to be functioning independently as a result of excessive political and government influence. So because of these allegations, the Global Alliance has withheld the accreditation for the second consecutive year. Next, we come to the last article, page number 13. This article refers to the Malaiyaha Tamils also referred to as Indian Tamils, who represent a unique category of Tamil population in our neighboring country, Sri Lanka. Now, the topic is very important for your prelims. That's why I've chosen this for a small discussion. See, I'm sure all of you know that one of the biggest concerns and issues for Sri Lanka has been the ethnic conflict that the country has gone through, right? The conflict between the Tamil minorities and the Sinhala Buddhist majority. This has been an age-old conflict that Sri Lanka has been affected by. Since its independence in 1948, the country has been deeply hit by this ethnic divide between the Tamil minorities and the Sinhala Buddhist majority. So, if you look at the Tamil community in Sri Lanka, they are mainly concentrated in two parts of Sri Lanka. In the northern province of Sri Lanka and as well as in the eastern province over here. This is where you find one category of Tamils known as the Sri Lankan Tamils. They are the largest Tamil population. They belong to the Sri Lankan Tamil category. These are the Tamils who had naturally migrated centuries ago. Over hundreds of years, thousands of years from southern India, these are the Tamils who had naturally moved and migrated and settled in this part of Sri Lanka. So Sri Lankan Tamils have lived with harmony with the Sinhala Buddhists in the age-old times and even in the medieval times. They had been accepted as part of Sri Lankan society by the Sinhala Buddhists as well. But more recently, in the last 2 centuries, in the last 200 years, a new category of Tamils were brought here to Sri Lanka, to the central highlands that you see over here, right here in the middle, this yellow shaded region. This is called the Central Highlands of Sri Lanka or the Sri Lankan Highlands. It is very similar to our Western Ghats as far as its vegetation, its climate is concerned. So the region is perfect for plantation crops. Just like the Western Ghats of Karnataka, Tamil Nadu, Kerala, it is best suited for coffee, tea, spices, rubber, etc. Similar plantation crops, commercial crops can be grown here in the Central Highlands of Sri Lanka. So by looking at this potential, the British who had colonized Ceylon, they needed cheap labor, and under the indentured labor system, they brought Tamils from the Madras province and settled them over here. These recent Tamils who were brought to Sri Lanka in the last 200 years by the British, they are called Indian Tamils. They are the second category of Tamil minorities. And these Indian Tamils are none other than the Malaiyaha Tamils. They're also referred to as the Malaiyaha Tamils or Indian Tamils. When the Sinhala Buddhist majority started discriminating and targeting the Tamil population post-independence, their first target was the new category of Tamils who had come to the country, that is the Malaiyaha or Indian Tamils. In 1948, the Sri Lankan government, after becoming independent, was a Sinhala Buddhist majority government. It refused to accept the Indian Tamils as their own citizens. Because according to Sinhala Buddhists, they had come recently to their country in the last 150-200 years and they were brought here by the British. This resentment between the communities had been built by the British as part of their divide and rule policy by deliberately favoring the Indian Tamils in lucrative administrative jobs, making them more influential and powerful to the disadvantage of the Sinhala Buddhists. This had bred resentment and divide and hatred between the communities. So after becoming independent, the Sinhala Buddhist majority government started targeting the Indian Tamils through citizenship laws. In the 1948 citizenship law brought out by the Sri Lankan government, Indian Tamils were declared as stateless. They were not recognized as citizens of the country. Sri Lanka said they are India's responsibility. They don't belong to Sri Lanka. It asked India to take their responsibility, to take them back, and it even tried repatriating them back to India. That is where the initial problems began. This is where targeted discrimination, oppression, and even violence was unleashed against Indian Tamils, the Malaiyaha Tamils, by the radical Sinhala Buddhist majority. This marked the beginning of the ethnic divide and eventually laid the foundation for the ethnic war that spread to northern and eastern provinces as well. Alright? So the Malaiyaha Tamils, they have lost their citizenship as well. Later, India took part responsibility of this. We have taken a lot of Indian Tamils and settled them in the country. And we have tried helping the community which remains in Sri Lanka today. We have given them assistance. Recently, India has promised a project to build around 14,000 houses in the Sri Lankan Central Highlands to rehabilitate the Indian Tamils or the Malaiyaha Tamils who are linked closely with India. But this project has not been completed. So there is some criticism here that the project to build the houses has been delayed. But in general, you should know as to which is this community, where do they belong, what role do they play in India-Sri Lanka relations. All right. So this is the last point I wanted to discuss, and this brings my discussion to an end. Please take a look at the mains practice questions for today. It's all based on what we have covered, and I expect you to write answers and post your answers in the answer writing portal. So that is it from my side. I hope it was a good, fruitful session. Do let me know how it went in the comments. And if you liked it, share it with other aspirants. Without fail, press the like button. That is the best encouragement you can give us. And of course, subscribe to our channel. So that is it. Thanks for watching. Have a good day.